Hi, I'm Joe Galvin, Chief Research Officer at Vistage Worldwide. I'm happy to host the latest webinar in our Leading in Challenging Times series. This series provides the definitive source of thought leadership on pressing topics facing small and mid-sized businesses, combining expert speakers like we have with Dr. Bill Crawford today, and peer perspectives is how we help Vistage members make critical decisions, help our leaders learn, that drive growth. I think we'd all agree it's been a pretty stressful couple of weeks, in fact, couple of months, as we've wrestled with the COVID-19 crisis. And that's what today's focus is on managing the stress that gets in the way of good decision making. And we are so fortunate to have our 2019 Speaker of the Year, Dr. Bill Crawford, here with us to share some of the amazing work that he's done. Bill holds a master's degree and a PhD in psychology from the University of Houston. He's also a licensed psychologist, author of 8 books, organizational consultant. Over 30 years, he's created over 3,500 presentations for organizations such as Sprint, Shell, the American Medical Association. His 2 PBS specials on stress and communication have been seen by more than 15 million people. He's spoken to over 500 Vistage groups and connected with so many of our members, including the opportunity to work with our chair community a couple of weeks ago as we all try to manage the stress. Just a note, if you have questions for Bill during the course of the presentation, just type them into the questions pane and we'll process those and we'll be able to handle those at the end of the presentation. So again, thank you, Dr. Bill Crawford, for being with us today. We're really excited about what you have to share. Let's get started.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks to Vistage for this opportunity. You know, one of the things I love to do is work with Vistage members and Vistage groups, and really I love to travel around the country doing that. Well, clearly that's not happening now. So I'm kind of home on my own, home alone, so to speak. And so this opportunity is really great because it gives me an opportunity to do what I love and share what I love with the people that come to learn. And that's one of the things I love about Vistage. You come to learn and you love taking science and systems, applying it to knowledge. So I love the title today, Resetting Your Mindset with Clarity, Confidence, and Creativity. I'm going to go a little bit deeper with that and talk about new information on the neuroscience of clarity, confidence, and creativity. So I want to make sure I'm bringing you new information today. I don't want to just tell you what you already know. I'm not going to tell you to meditate or eat more or get more sleep or exercise. That's all really good advice, but you already know that. I want to make sure that it's new information. Matter of fact, there's a quote from Albert Einstein that I really love that says, problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. I love that because I think it speaks to how we might find ourselves trying to be effective and solve problems when we really don't know what's going on. We don't have that level of awareness that's going to allow us to be creative. So when I'm talking about new information on the neuroscience of clarity, confidence, and creativity, I'm really talking about starting with clarity so then that we can access our confidence and our creativity. And specifically, I wanted to today bring you information on what I call clarity about the what, the why, and the how. What's going on? What is happening here? And why is it so debilitating? Why is everybody experiencing it the way they are? And real specifically, how can you be influential in the process? So I'm going to do something that I normally do with my Vistage meetings, and I have been using it with my virtual meetings from time to time, and that is begin to, let me do this for a moment, show something that is kind of helpful, I think, in kind of helping us understand the what. I'm going to move aside for a minute and kind of work with this flip chart. And I know it's a little bit weird to do that in a virtual meeting, but I love it because it helps me kind of conceptualize the what. I call this real life the what. And by the way, if you can't read,
Bill?
Yeah.
Bill, can I jump in? Minimize your screen so all we see is you in the chart. We see your desktop right now with the blue cloud. And I know you want to be full screen on this.
Oh, I see what you mean, right? Yeah, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this stuff's too good.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So don't want to do that. See
there we go.
Well, now do you see me in the chart? Okay, great. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks for that, Joe. I appreciate that. Okay. So basically what we're talking about is I want to make sure I'm working with your real life experience. So when I'm doing my Vistage presentations and working with Vistage organizations, I always say, okay, what are the kind of situations that trigger our stress? Because I want to make sure I'm dealing with your real life situations. You know, I don't really think we need a webinar or a seminar when everything's going great. But when we're dealing with certain triggers, so your colleagues have said, well, of course, COVID-19 is at the top of the list here. Gosh, the economy, being isolated, difficult people. A lot of times Vistage members are going, man, you know, it's one thing to deal with all the stuff that's going on, but sometimes people just aren't listening, or they're being argumentative, or not taking accountability, or not listening. And that's not good. Being worried about our family and our kids. Uncertainty. That's a big one that a lot of people talk about. Deadlines, lack of business. So here's what I would like for you to do. Just imagine that your trigger, your challenging situation that's getting in the way of your clarity, confidence, and creativity is on this list. If you don't see it on this list, or don't worry if you can't read it, just imagine that it's here and this will work. So I say, okay, when we're dealing with all of this stuff, how do we find ourselves reacting? Well, your colleagues have said, man, we get stressed and we get frustrated, we get anxious, we get a little angry sometimes, start to worry, get a little resentful, confused, annoyed, lose focus, lose sleep, get depressed, drives us crazy. So again, if your particular reaction isn't on that list, don't worry about it, just imagine that it is, and this will work. So obviously this is the what? We got the trigger, we got the reaction. That means this particular situation triggers this reaction. Now, we don't like feeling stressed, frustrated, angry, annoyed. So what happens is we often go over here and try to change whatever made us feel that way in the first place. And by the way, anytime you can change anything over here and you feel better, I'm a big fan of that. But hey, the economy, isolation, difficult people, deadlines, this kind of stuff, there's a lot of things over here that we can't just change in order to feel better. So what happens when we recognize we can't change the problem, that triggers another reaction. But this second reaction is even more problematic because there's a sense of frustration and powerlessness to the reaction. Unfortunately, because we still want to have some influence on our life, we still try to go over here and try to have some influence here. But if we can't, that triggers another reaction and makes this seem worse, and reaction and worse, reaction and worse, reaction and worse, reaction and worse, until something explodes. I call this the cycle of stress, frustration, and annoyance. And again, I think what's important about this cycle is that this really represents the what. I'm going to go back to the slides here, see if I can do that. And I want to do this, and I want to do this. There we go. So we kind of have some idea about the what here. The what is not just that we're getting stressed, that this is triggering stress. Because, hey, if we just got a little stress and could flip up to clarity, confidence, and creativity, that wouldn't be the problem. But now we know part of the what is getting caught in this cycle. So what else is going on? Well, what else is going on is I think we don't really understand the science behind this reaction. See, a lot of people think that stress is what something or someone does to us. The economy stresses me out, isolation stresses me out, lack of business stresses me out. And the good news is that's not true. Because if that were true, we would have to change all of this in order to feel any different. What people don't know about stress is actually just a series of chemical changes in our body. Those chemicals, for the most part, are adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. Don't need to remember exactly what they are, other than that's what all this is, a series of chemical changes in our body. Matter of fact, if we look at the relationship between stress and productivity, or you can call the P, peace of mind, or purposefulness, when there's zero stress in our life in terms of these chemicals, there's zero productivity. It's called sleep. Not real productive while we're sleeping. Now, while we're sleeping, there is very little adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol running throughout our body. Guess which three chemicals wake us up in the morning? Adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. So for a while in the morning, as our stress goes up in the form of these chemicals, our productivity goes up. We're more productive 30 minutes after we wake up than we are 30 seconds after we wake up. And that's because of these natural, normal, healthy chemicals going off in our body. This is what's called good stress. Wakes us up, gets us going. Most people don't have a problem producing enough good stress in our life. For most of us, when this chemicals, this stress continues to go up, our productivity, our peace of mind, our ability to be effective in life goes down. We crash and burn down there somewhere. This is where we implode, we explode. This is where our anxiety and burnout happens. So here's what I want to do today. I want to help you raise your level of awareness of when you first feel pushed over the top. When you first start going from your most productive into this downward spiral. Then what I want to do is give you some information about how to bring you back into what I call the zone of productivity, where you now can access your best and be most effective by accessing a certain part of the brain. See, that's the why. When I was getting my PhD, I noticed how common this was, and I wanted to know why it happened. So I left the College of Psychology and I went to the College of Biology, and I took a course called the Biological Basis of Behavior. And in it, I learned that everything we think and feel and do and say, how we react to others, how others react to us, all has to do with how the brain processes information. So I've spent the last 30 years of my life creating a system, a philosophy, a framework that actually shows people how to access their best by accessing a specific part of the brain. That's why I call it the neuroscience of clarity, confidence, and creativity. And how to avoid the stress, frustration, anger, worry, resentment, the stuff that gets in the way of our clarity, confidence, and creativity by avoiding a specific part of the brain. Now, the brain is very complex. People spend their lives studying the brain. We're not going to do that because we're going to get caught in all the terminology. I just want you to think of the brain in three ways: top, middle, and lower. Because each one of these parts of the brain do something different. And if we can figure out what they do and how to influence this process, we can have a tremendous amount of influence over our life and the lives of others. So lower brain's called the brain stem. You've heard of this. This is where our fight or flight responses are located. It is the part of the brain that regulates our muscle tension, heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, etc. We can just call it the lower brain. Middle brain's called the limbic system. Some people call this the emotional brain because this is where our emotions are triggered for the most part. We can just call it the middle brain. What most people don't know about this middle brain, however, is that this middle brain acts as a gatekeeper. Or in today's terminology, it acts as a scanner, a processor, and a router. It scans incoming data, processes it or interprets it, and then either routes it down to the lower brain or up to the upper 80% of the brain, the neocortex, what I call the top of the mind, where we have access to our interpersonal skills, problem-solving skills, clarity, confidence, creativity, compassion, etc. So again, this is what I learned in this course. I didn't know this till I took this course, and most people don't know this. It all starts here. Data comes in from our five senses. It is first scanned by the middle brain. If the middle brain doesn't see a problem, got a remote here in my hand, no problem, sends the data on up to the neocortex, brainstem works in the background, regulating breathing, muscle tension, heart rate, blood pressure, everything's fine. But if the middle brain senses anything or anyone it doesn't like, anything or anyone it has determined to be a problem or a trigger or a stressor or a threat of any kind, or anything or anyone that is similar to any problem, trigger, stress, or threat we've ever experienced in the past, it sends the data immediately down to the lower brain, bypassing the neocortex. Now, at this point, the lower brain can only do two things: fight or flight. Now, some people call it fight, flight, or freeze, which is true. I'm going to kind of make freeze a part of flight. And by the way, when I'm talking about fight or flight, I don't mean fighting something or running away from it necessarily. Anger is fight, aggressiveness is fight, resentment is fight. Flight is depression and withdrawal and kind of anxiety. So it can show up in different ways. What's important to recognize, however, is that this fight or flight reaction is driven by certain blood pressure, muscle tension goes up, heart rate goes up, we get ready to strike out or withdraw that response. In the latest brain research, this is called downshifting because it happens so quickly. And again, what we need to know is that it bypasses the most intelligent, capable, purposeful part of who we are. Now, in a fight or flight situation, this is exactly what we're supposed to happen. If we're driving down the road and somebody slams on their brakes in front of us, we want to be able to react without thinking. Because if we have to go, okay, wait a minute, they just slammed on their brakes, I wonder, we would hit them by that point. So anytime you need to react without thinking to be safe in a physically dangerous situation, this is the perfect part of the brain to go to. The problem is, and this is the new information, we're being thrown down into this old reactive brain in situations where we need access to our best interpersonal skills, problem-solving skills, clarity, confidence, creativity, etc. If you've read any of Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence, he calls this neural hijacking or emotional hijacking. Some people call it amygdala hijacking, little tiny part of that middle brain called the amygdala, hypersensitive to worry or fear. Regardless of what we're calling it, my hope is this is explaining a lot of things. This is what PTSD is all about. This is what panic attacks or anxiety attacks are all about. This is why people make bad decisions. We could call this the science of effective decision making. This is why when you're trying to give people information and tell them what they need to know, they don't get it because they're literally not in the part of the brain that can process data. By the way, this isn't just me saying this. People around the country and people around the world are recognizing that if we want to have more influence in our life and the lives of others, we've got to know where that influence starts, and we've got to be able to influence the process. So now we know this middle brain is throwing us into the lower brain. By the way, here's why. The job of the middle brain is to keep us alive as a species. So it scans the environment looking for anything negative. It has a tendency to pay more attention to negative data than positive data because negative data has the potential for a threat where positive data generally doesn't. Plus, it's not very smart and it's working with old software. So it has a tendency to interpret almost anything negative as dangerous and throws us into that part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. And remember, this blood pressure, muscle tension, heart rate that's triggered by the lower brain is a chemical change in our brain and body: adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. Cortisol is the big one. You've heard of that. That's the stress hormone. The job of cortisol is to rush throughout our body, shutting down all non-essential systems so that we can go into fight or flight. So it shuts down our digestive system. That's where stomach problems come from. It shuts down our immune system. Gosh, if there's anything we need in these kind of crazy times, it's a healthy immune system. But the middle brain thinks, okay, if I'm in a fight or flight situation, I don't need my immune system. I need to kind of make all that energy available to my heart and my lungs so that I can fight and run away. So it shuts down our immune system. Not good. Plus, this adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol will manifest itself into stress, frustration, anxiety, resentment. And when we try to deal with the life from this lower 20% of the brain, we can't. Life seems to get worse because this lower brain isn't designed to deal with these kind of problems or situations. When this starts to seem worse, the middle brain goes, whoa, more negative data, didn't mean for that to happen, sends it right back down to the lower brain. And now you can see how this external cycle is replicated by this internal cycle. And it's not like this happens every once in a while, especially today. If we're not careful, this can become a lifestyle for us. We can find ourselves trapped in this lower 20% of the brain, trying to deal with rather complex personal and interpersonal situations from this very limiting part of the brain. So now we know the what. New information on the what. It's not that just that we get triggered, but that this creates an ever-escalating cycle. Plus, we now know what this is. This is actually a chemical change in our body triggered by this lower brain. We know the why, because the middle brain is interpreting anything negative as dangerous and throwing us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. The rest of the seminar is going to be about the how. I'm going to give you a behavioral model you can do anywhere, anytime, that's going to show you how to shift from this lower brain up into the top of the mind, the neocortex, and actually change the chemical makeup of your body from adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol to serotonin and endorphins, chemicals that help us feel better and think clear and strengthen our immune system. And I call this system life from the top of the mind. This is what I get to go around the world teaching. I've taught it to about over 500 Vistage groups. I've gotten a book about it, and this is my favorite thing to do because it's just something I've been working on over the last 30 years. It's a system, it's a philosophy, a framework for bringing new information to the process and giving you new information about how to deal with it. Now, just so that you know, it is a three-part system. The first part we're going to go over today. How do we shift from the lower brain to the upper brain? Because until we do that, we can't do anything. When I'm talking to my Vistage groups and working with Vistage organizations, I also have another model about how to stay in the top of the mind. And then given that Vistage members are so influential in other people's lives, I show you how to get other people to shift from their resistant brain to their receptive brain. But here's something I've learned as a presenter and a teacher. You never want to just kind of pack everything you know into 45 minutes. It starts feeling overwhelming. So we're going to focus on that first model so that you walk away with a 5-step model that shows you how to shift from the lower brain to the upper brain. Then if you're interested in helping me or talking to me about doing this other stuff, we can talk about it. All right. Let's take everything we've learned so far, put it into one slide. We now know what's going on. The middle brain is interpreting the triggers as dangerous and throwing us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. This is where we get angry, stressed, frustrated based on these chemicals. And if we try to deal with life from this lower 20% of the brain, we get trapped down there. So here's what I'm going to show you how to do. I'm going to show you how to retrain, reprogram this middle brain. Given that the middle brain is the scanner, processor, router part of the brain, we need to be able to influence how it is interpreting data so it stops interpreting data as dangerous and allows us to go to that upper 80% of the brain where we have access to our clarity, confidence, creativity, compassion, problem-solving skills, interpersonal skills. This is where we become more powerful, more influential in our life and the lives of others. Here's the problem, however. This lower brain is unconscious. We're not doing this on purpose. We just find ourselves doing it. There's a great quote from Carl Jung that says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life. But we'll call it fate. We'll call it difficult people. We'll call it uncertainty. We'll call it deadlines. See, we don't want these situations, these people controlling our life. So I'm going to show you how to retrain that middle brain. Now, in order to retrain, reprogram the middle brain, we got to be in the upper 80% of the brain. So let's start with where we started, the clarity, confidence, and creativity. In order to access our confidence and our creativity and get out of this cycle, we first have to be clear about the new information about the problem and the solution. The good news is you now know something about the problem that only about 1% of the people on the planet know. 99% of the people on the planet think this makes me this. That will forever trap them in that cycle unless they can change all of this. You now know this, that the situation is being interpreted by a middle brain in such a way that triggers a chemical change in my brain and body, in my stress, my frustration, my anger. This isn't my failure to cope. This isn't how someone is making me feel. It's just data being sent to the wrong part of the brain. So what we want to do is make sure this upper 80% of the brain regains control. By the way, a lot of people like to regain control, except that most people try to control this so they don't feel this. That traps them in that cycle if they can't change all this. When I'm talking about regaining control, I'm talking about this upper 80% of the brain, this clear, confident, creative part of who we are, regaining control from the lower reactive brain. The upper 80% of the brain regaining control from the lower, kind of less than purposeful part of the brain. Now, the lower brain, the brainstem, normally controls blood pressure, and that's kind of hard to control. Lower brain normally controls heart rate. That is also kind of hard to control. Lower brain normally controls breathing. That is not hard to control. That's why if you've ever done any stress management or yoga or mindfulness or Tai Chi or any of that, breathing is always part of the process. It just has to be done in a certain way in order to be effective. I encourage you to use one of two models, unless you have your own model. If you do, fine. But if you don't, I encourage you to use either the 5x5 model or the 4-4-4 model. I like the 4-4-4 model. It's what the Navy SEALs use to regain control. Good enough for them, good enough for me. It's real easy. You just inhale for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4. 5x5 is the same thing. You just inhale for a count of 5 and exhale for a count of 5. Either one of those will work because it will have you breathing slowly and deeply and purposefully, which means you're coming from the purposeful brain and you're counting. It's only one part of the brain that can count. If you ever find yourself dealing with someone who's having a panic attack or an anxiety attack and they want you to help them, ask them to count backwards from 100 by 2 or 3. By the time they get to the mid-80s, certainly the mid-70s, you're going to notice a change in their demeanor because it requires this part of the brain to regain control because the upper 80% of the brain is the only part of the brain that can count. Now, if you want to make this even more powerful and have this upper 80% of the brain take over 2 functions normally controlled by the lower 20% of the brain, then what I'm going to encourage you to do is actually say the word relax on the exhale. Now, it needs to be relax. It can't be relax, relax. You just need to relax. Come on now, relax. That's going to trigger more lower brain stuff. But if you'll do this, relax, and just let those shoulders drop because your goal is to have this upper 80% of the brain literally take over both breathing and muscle tension. That puts you back in charge. That's the good news. The bad news is a lot of times when I get to this part of the model, somebody goes, Bill, don't tell me to take a deep breath. I hate it when people tell me that because it doesn't change anything. Well, of course, it doesn't change anything out there, but notice what we're trying to do. We're trying to change what part of our brain is in control. However, I do want to show you the science behind this so you can feel a little bit better about taking a deep breath. The main science is called the vagus nerve. There is a nerve that goes from the brain down to the body and from the body back up to the brain, and it explains the mind-body connection and why exercise and breathing and mindfulness and tapping, all that work. When the brain tells the lungs, which of course is part of the body, to breathe deeply, the lungs then send a message to the brain to calm down. So it's kind of it's a give and a take. It's a way that the brain now has more influence over the body, but the body is also influencing the brain. And if you want to, you can Google this. If you want to kind of Google how breathing calms your brain, the science of slow, deep breathing. This is my favorite one. The diaphragmatic effects of breathing on attention, negative affect, and stress in healthy adults. In other words, there's tons of science out there on how and why breathing works. So feel free to Google if you want. Bottom line, these two steps will take you from bad to better. Now, here's what I've noticed about Vistage folks, however. You don't want to stop at better. You want to be able to bring your best to a situation. So in order to do that, we've got to move beyond what you can get on Google. Frankly, you can get this on Google. I want to show you something you can't get on Google. These are the physiological components of stress, frustration, anxiety. I want us to be able to talk about the psychological aspects of stress, anxiety, and frustration. There are a lot of these, but the most powerful of these psychological aspects are the power of questions. Questions actually determine what part of the brain we're in. I call them the search engine for the brain. For example, if I were to type a question into this computer and punch send or enter, it would go searching its data banks for the answer. But it wouldn't determine, is this a good question or a bad question or a helpful question or not a helpful question? It would attempt to answer any question we ask. Our brain is the same way. When we ask a question, it doesn't evaluate the quality of the question. It tries to answer any question we ask, and here's the problem. Without really meaning to, we've been asking BS questions. BS stands for brainstem, by the way, in case you're worried about it. Like, what is wrong with these people? Or who taught this idiot to drive? Or man, how long am I gonna have to deal with this crap? Or why won't my kids do what I want them to do? See, all of those are understandable questions, but they're all brainstem questions. They're questions about the problem and the pain of the problem, and they'll throw us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with pain. So I suggest we breathe and relax. Make sure until we feel in control. May take 2 times, may take 3 or 4 times. You do it until you feel centered and in control. Then if we want the top of the mind to be in charge, and questions are powerful, let's make sure we're asking top of the mind questions. Top of the mind questions are questions that can only be asked and answered by the upper 80% of the brain. So they're designed to put the upper 80% of the brain in charge. And they should provide even more clarity to what's going on here. For example, one of them is, was this thought, emotion, or action chosen on purpose? Well, no, we don't get stressed, frustrated, anxious, angry, worried, resentful, confused on purpose, so that's a no. Next one's a good old Dr. Phil question. How's it working for me? Is this helping me create the life I want? Is this producing the results I want? Most people say, okay, it's understandable, but it doesn't really help us be more effective. The third one I really love, especially for leaders, that's why I love working with Vistage so much on this. It says, is this the way I want to be defined? See, I think we have to ask ourselves, when we find ourselves trapped in this cycle, are we defining who we are? Or are we being defined by the difficult people, difficult situations around us? Because when we say this makes us this economy is really stressing me out, these difficult people are really making me angry, man, these deadlines are driving me crazy. Whenever we say this makes us this, what we're doing is we're giving the difficult people, difficult situations in our life the power to define us or control us. I don't think we want these people, these situations to have that kind of power. So if we don't want them to have that kind of power, I think we've got to be willing to take on that power ourselves. So my solution is that we define ourselves from this very purposeful, powerful part of the brain. And if you are influential in somebody's life, if you are a leader in your home and or your organization, there's a concept I encourage leaders to adopt. I talk about this all the time when I'm working with Vistage. I call it the videotape concept. Nobody uses videotape anymore, but work with me here. I think you'll like it. It says people who are influential in other people's lives, leaders, should be willing to interact with all of these people in such a way that that interaction could be videotaped and used as a training film for how you want them to interact with everybody else. See, to someone, we represent how powerful people get things done. They are looking to us as a model for how to be. So what I suggest we do is make sure we're coming from this upper 80% of the brain. And one of the ways of doing that is to ask the question, hey, am I doing this on purpose? No. Is it really working for me? No. Is this how I want to be defined? No. I love the fourth question. It might be more powerful than all three put together. It says, would I teach this way of being to my child, my children, or someone I love? Man, as a parent, that just bottom lines it for me. But frankly, even when I'm working with high school kids and college kids who obviously don't have kids, and some of you may not have kids, even people who don't have kids, they love this question. Because frankly, I have yet to meet anyone that would teach someone they love on purpose to be stressed and frustrated and anxious and angry and worried and resentful and confused and annoyed. So these are what I call the 4 criteria, because I think we can use them as a criteria for, number one, getting some clarity about what's going on and determining what's working for us and what isn't. So I tell you what, normally I stop the slide here, but I don't want to mess that up again. So I'm just going to step back here and I'll read what this thing says. It's going to be a little bit hard to read because I'm still in this little box up here, but I will tell you what it says and read it to you. So this is what defines the problem. So when I'm working with my Vistage members, I say, okay, what if we were working or dealing with the challenging situations in our life in a way that was more purposeful, in a way that we believe is more effective, in a way that does make the statement we want to make about who we are, and in a way we would teach to someone we love? And so your colleagues have come up with this list. Don't worry that you can't read it. I'll read it to you. Your colleague says, hey, I want to be more confident, more calm, more creative, more optimistic, clear, authentic. I love this authentic role. There is a quote from Sidney Poitier. He says, you don't have to become someone you're not to become better than you are. So I'm not trying to change anybody here into somebody you're not. You have your own style, your own personality. I just want you to be able to access your best by knowing what part of the brain that comes from. So when we say, hey, what does that look like? I want to be more calm, creative, optimistic, kind, influential, purposeful, resilient, flexible, productive, in control, empathetic. So again, you might have a different list here, but notice how this list really fits the 4 criteria. These qualities and characteristics are chosen on purpose. We are going to be more effective when we bring these qualities, characteristics to life. These definitely represent how we want to be defined, because that's how we created the list. It isn't this exactly what we would teach to those we love. So here's what I like to do. I like to make sure I'm bringing you information that can make a significant difference in your life. So given that this is the situation, and this is the way we found ourselves reacting in the past, what if after learning this material, learning this system in the future, you could respond to this like this? In other words, what if in the future you could deal with the challenging people and situations in your life in a way that has you coming from the top of the mind, has you accessing the qualities and characteristics that represent you at your best, that allow you to be the most effective? So now we've got 4 questions we can ask ourselves anytime we want to determine, number one, what part of the brain we're in, and shift from a focus on the problem to a focus on the solution. Anytime we find ourselves feeling stressed, frustrated, angry, whatever, we can say, wait a minute, am I doing this on purpose? Is it really working for me? Is this how I want to be defined? Would I teach this to someone I love? And if we get no, 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 and no, we go, okay, that means I'm in the lower brain. Then we can use these exact same questions to say, all right, what if I were dealing with this situation, COVID-19, economy, all the stuff that everybody's dealing with, difficult people, in a way that was more purposeful, in a way that I believe is more effective, in a way that does make the statement I want to make about who I am, and in a way I would teach to someone I love, what would that look like? So the key here, and by the way, I'm calling this our highest purpose. That's what it says up here, highest purpose, because the problem is these reactions have a lot of neural pathways associated with them. This is not the first time we've done this. It probably won't be the last time we've done this. But every time we have done this over our lifetime, we have created and sustained some neural pathways that went from this middle brain down to the lower brain. So if we change nothing going forward, we're still going to find ourselves trapped in the cycle a lot because of these old neural pathways. If we decide that defining who we are in a way that we would recommend to someone we love is our highest purpose, the most important thing in our life, and we start practicing bringing these qualities to life, we are literally rewiring the brain. You may have heard the phrase neuroplasticity, means the brain is always rewiring itself. So the more you get clarity about who you are when you're coming from the top of the mind, and then be able to imagine bringing these qualities and characteristics into the situation. So it's not just about making a list. It's saying, who am I when I am calm and confident and creative and optimistic? Have I ever been calm and confident before? Well, of course. What does that look like? What does that feel like? See, it's really important that we're able to imagine being this way in this situation. Now, sometimes when I get to this part of the models, people say, well, Bill, that's really nice, but that's just our imagination. Let me show you how powerful our imagination is. Everybody imagine holding a lemon in your hand. So you can see the shiny yellow pulp of the outside of the lemon. You can see the shiny yellow pulp of the inside of the lemon. Imagine picking it up, squeezing it. You see the juice squirt up. Now, everybody imagine taking a big bite of your lemon. All right, you can put your lemon down now. Do you notice what happens? Saliva muscles, some people are going, salt, margarita, help me out here. Here's something really important. There is no real lemon, but you have just changed the chemical makeup of your body. Anything that happened as a result of you imagining biting into a lemon, the saliva, the muscles, that was a chemical change in your body. You've just changed the chemical makeup of your body based not on what you held in your hand, but what you held in your imagination. And what that tells us is the mind will change our body chemically based on any image we're holding in our mind, whether it's happening or not. Because we knew we weren't really biting into a lemon, but we actually, the chemical change was what it was. So that's why it's really going to be important for you to imagine who you are when you're being this way, and then imagine bring that to life. Once you can do that, then the last step in this model is to notice the change. Because you want to get really clear, okay, how did I feel? What did it feel like when I was stressed or frustrated, angry, anxious, worried, resentful? And how now do I feel when I'm feeling more calm, confident, in control? You want to notice the change. Plus, the N in this model helps me spell brain. I like my models to spell things. You would not believe how long it took me to make it spell brain, but I really like that because in many ways what we're talking about is understanding the why. It's the brain misinterpreting this situation as dangerous and throwing us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger, and then using a model that spells brain, breathe, relax, ask those top of the mind questions, imagine being that way, notice the change that allows us to then access the best of who we are and then bring this to life. All right, I want to give you as many tools as possible to help you do this. So I'm going to give you a map that takes everything we've learned so far, puts it into 4 graphics. Let's recognize that this is something that we will find ourselves feeling. We can't say we'll never be stressed or angry or frustrated. But let's make sure we've raised our level of awareness. I call this the LTM system, the Life from the Top of the Mind system, part 1. If we can begin to see this, not as how we're being made to feel by some person or situation, but what's going on in the brain, if we can make sure we interpret our stress, frustration, anger as good information, saying, hey, now I know what's going on. My lower brain is controlling my reactions and limiting my clarity, confidence, and creativity. In other words, if we can just see this as data being sent to the wrong part of the brain, that keeps us from being anxious about our anxiety or getting stressed about our stress or worried about our worry. Then if we can begin to see these reactions, again, not as our failure to cope, but as a signal, a valuable signal that I need to change what part of my brain is in control. There's a quote I use in my seminars that says, stress is a signal something needs to change. Suffering is when we don't make the change. So if we can begin to see stress, frustration, anxiety, anger, worry, all of these responses as a valuable signal, kind of like we're driving down the road, little red light comes on our dashboard. You know, that little red light isn't the problem. That's part of the solution. It's there on purpose. It lets us know something needs to change. So if we can begin to see this reaction as a signal of what needs to change, then we flip up to clarity, confidence, and creativity by changing what part of the brain we're in. So now you have a model that is designed to allow you to literally shift from that lower brain to the upper brain, change the chemical makeup of your body from adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol to serotonin and endorphins. One other thing I want to bring into this before we go to questions, you may remember a gentleman in the past, his name is Albert Ellis. He's called the father of cognitive psychology. He came up with what's called the ABC model. He calls this A for the adverse event, and he calls this C for the consequence. He says the problem people have is that they believe that A causes C. He says the good news is A doesn't cause C, A is filtered through B, and B causes C, and B are our beliefs. Here's a good example. Let's assume you have two people in a room. One of them is deathly afraid of dogs. She's been afraid of dogs all her life. She believes dogs are dangerous. Second person in the room has about 10 dogs at home. She thinks dogs are God's gift to the universe. If you bring a dog into the room, that's the fact. You're going to have two totally different reactions based on their belief about dogs. It's not the dog that's causing them to feel that way. It's their belief. One of them, who believes dogs are dangerous, runs out of the room. The other runs to hug the dog. It's the same dog. So if we'll start recognizing it's our beliefs and our brain that is determining whether we go to this consequence or to this consequence, we can start choosing the consequence we want to be able to access, the quality or characteristic we want to be able to access, and then begin to use the 4 criteria to get there. By the way, for those of you who want a list of the questions, they're in the handout, so feel free to download that. Also, if you go to my website, billcrawfordphd.com, and hit the article page, there's an article on clarity, confidence, and creativity that goes into the 4 questions and kind of gives you a little bit more detail about it. Also, I do want to make sure I mention that I have this YouTube channel. It's got about 400 short videos on there. I post one every week. And about the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've been posting one that has something to do with dealing with the current reality. So one of the videos is how to use awareness versus worry to stay safe. Awareness comes from the upper brain, worry comes from the lower brain. Another one is how to use neuroscience to strengthen your immune system. Another one's called COVID-19, the what, the why, and the how, and that's where I walk people through the brain model. So if you kind of want to see that again, feel free to watch this video, but you could also go to the YouTube channel. And then my friend Dean Minuto, a former Vistage Speaker of the Year, I'm sure you've had him. If you haven't, please do, he's great. He and I did an interview where we also walked through the brain model. So what I'm trying to do is put as much information out there to deal with this. I think the last one I talked about is dealing with uncertainty or ambiguity. What I want to do is help people understand that for us to have the most influence in our life, we need to be able to access the most influential part of the brain. And the first thing we need to be able to do that is to recognize when we're in the lower brain, and then begin to use a model that spells brain to shift up to that upper 80% of the brain and regain control. So we started with this quote from Albert Einstein: problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. My hope today is we've raised our level of awareness about what's going on here. It's not difficult people, difficult situations making us feel a certain way. It's just data being sent to the wrong part of the brain. So we could call this resetting your mindset. We could call it new information on the neuroscience of clarity, confidence, and creativity. I like to call it life from the top of the mind. Whew. All right. I've just gone through the thing here. I want to stop the slides here and go to the questions and let us kind of be able to talk about what have people been asking, Joe, and how can I help?
Well, I tell you, Dr. Bill, you've kind of stressed me out as I now begin to realize how I've processed this crazy experience we've all been through. If you just go back 2 months ago to March 1st, and you think about how you thought of the world and where we are today, it's really helped me individually kind of process how you react to stuff, because no one could anticipate this. And we are kind of like lower brain people to begin with. So I know my lower brain is pretty much exhausted, so I help the path, your work here to help us path up. A question that I personally had, and I wanted to ask you before we get into the questions that were submitted is, as leaders, we have to recognize how this is affecting us and how we react to it. And you've given us a model that we can start to practice. It's not going to come naturally, it'll take time. But now I turn to my people, and my people are all in this stress mode. They're all in their lower brain. how can I work with them to help them pull them up? I mean, obviously, watch Dr. Bill's presentation, but in those interactions as a leader, I'm at a staff meeting, I'm saying, you know what, guys, we're down 20%. And I'm just, hitting them with stress. Help me understand how I can leverage that as a leader to project some of that forward.
Great question. See, a lot of people see their stress as their failure to cope. And so when they're feeling stressed or anxious, they're worried that somehow there's something wrong with them or they're not doing it right. And when that happens, all of a sudden now they feel even more stressed because they feel inadequate. They feel like a failure in some part. So the first thing a leader needs to do is to normalize the stress reaction. So the first thing a leader needs to go and says, hey, just want you guys to know, the fact that we're all feeling anxious and stressed and frustrated, that is totally understandable. It's totally normal. It's not our failure to cope. Matter of fact, it's going to help us, if we're talking to a leadership team, it's going to help us help others because now we can empathize with that. And then you can say, and here's something I've learned that really helped me. So anytime you're wanting to help someone else, tell them a story about yourself. So you can say, here's something that helped me. I've learned that my stress, my frustration is actually just data being sent to the wrong part of the brain. And now I've learned a model that actually allows us to shift from this old reactive stress brain to the clear, confident, creative brain. And so you can teach them. That's one of the simple beauty of this brain model. You can teach this to your people. You can teach it to your kids. You can teach it to anyone. So the great thing is, number one, you want to empathize with the stress. Number two, you want to let them know that it's not their failure to cope and kind of give them a little bit of the neuroscience and then give them a way of shifting. And all of a sudden people go, oh, okay, well, gosh, that makes sense. And they're feeling better about
it. Yeah, as a leader, what are some of those signals? Because we've all been processing this information, how we've done it before this session, right? And maybe we did, and maybe we didn't recognize that it's going midbrain, lower brain, top of mind. Right. What are some of the things, what are some of the triggers that I should become sensitive to that I'm in the lower brain, I need to be top of mind?
Yes, so obviously we're going to start to feel anxious. And we're going to start to, often people get a tightness in their chest. A lot of people get tightness in the back of their neck. That's literally tension so that we go into fight or flight. So the body thinks we're in fight or flight. So it tenses up all the muscles. Some of the people start feeling that tension across the front of the muscles, blood pressure, blood vessels start to constrict. Basically, what you want to do is think of a time in the past when you were really stressed and worried and ask yourself the question, what did that feel like and what did that look like? Because that's going to be the signal that it's going to start happening again. So what I do, given that I know that my stress is cortisol going down the back of my neck into my body, I can actually start to feel the cortisol go down the back of my neck, and then I shift up to the top of the mind because now I know exactly what's going on. My middle brain is misinterpreting some negative situation as dangerous and throwing me into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger, but it's not, this is making me this. That's a huge factor in moving past this, is getting past this is making me feel this way, because if we believe that, then we're going to be in trouble because there's nothing we can change over here.
Some would argue that stress is actually a motivator, that fight or flight, brings you to the top of your game. The adrenaline's pumping. I'm gonna eat the tiger before the tiger eats me. Well, that's not very smart. But my point is that when you is there some value to kind of hold on to the stress a little bit as a motivator, but not let it be debilitating?
Yeah, it is a motivator. Notice I talked at the very beginning of the seminar about how it wakes us up in the morning, and for a while it allows us to bring our best to life. What people are experiencing when they say, I function best under stress, they really like the adrenaline of the challenge. So it's not so much the cortisol, it's the adrenaline. Frankly, I bring a lot of adrenaline to my presentations. Otherwise, I'd be going, good evening and welcome to life from the top of the mind. So I kind of bring a certain amount of energy to what I'm doing. That's adrenaline. There's a difference between being adrenaline and kind of really being into it and being functional, and that cortisol where we get tipped over the edge and we start going down in terms of our productivity. So you want to begin to notice what that tipping point is for you so that you're operating at your maximum efficiency and effectiveness. But when it tips over, that's when you do the brain model and it takes you back into that mode of productivity.
Okay. Could you summarize the other two levels? Because you talked about the first level. Could you summarize the other two levels and just share a couple tips to kind of lead us on? Because I personally am not going to begin to practice this. I'm going to try to recognize these symbols and start developing that habit. But just real quick, what are those next two levels?
The next two part of the system?
Yeah.
So it's really important to know what's going on and how to get to the top of the mind. Then what I do is I have another 5-step model that's about how to make it a habit, how to rewire your brain to the point that it's a habit. And I've got something that if people will do it every day for 2 to 4 months, they will have actually rewired their brain by the end of that. So what we want to do is make accessing this a habit. Once we do that, then because we are leaders, we've got to be influential in other people's lives. And often these people are difficult. They're being resistant. They're not listening. They're not taking accountability. So the part 3 of the model, and Vistage members love this. How do you engage those resistant people so they shift from their resistant brain to their receptive brain so they truly hear and understand what you're wanting them to know?
Okay. And you answered the question, but how long does this take to become a habit? I mean, I'm going to start, as I said, working on this, recognizing this, trying to move from lower brain to upper brain. How long is it going to take just to do this first part?
Great question. It doesn't take long at all to get there. The question is, how long are you going to be able to stay there? So getting to the top of the mind and learning some of that second model so you know how to stay there is really important. Then it depends on how often you're practicing. Because see, when we are caught in this cycle, we're practicing reinforcing the cycle. See, we're always practicing something. So when people are willing to make these qualities and characteristics their highest purpose, the most important thing in their life, and start in the morning and go into the morning practicing, reboot, and go into the afternoon practicing, reboot, go into the evening practicing, and they're able to make this a practice and a discipline, then it starts becoming a habit pretty quickly because now we're practicing all the time and we're rewiring the brain.
That almost suggests then that what I need to do is sit down and spend time and define those words that capture higher purpose to me.
Yes.
And begin my day by reviewing and reinforcing those and resetting those so I'm actively in my upper brain as opposed to, oh, the alarm clock went off, oh, I got all this to do.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, when I'm doing my Vistage presentations with groups or Vistage meetings, I will have everybody make a list of their own triggers because the more we're aware of our triggers, the better. I will have them make a list of their old reactions. Then I have them turn the old reaction into a valuable signal, so it makes it part of the solution, and turn the problem into what I call the practice field. So we're actually going to be practicing this. Then I say, okay, just like you mentioned, what are the qualities and characteristics you want to bring to life that you would teach to someone you love? And I have them make a list of that. So now we have a list of the triggers, the reactions, and our highest purpose. And if we're willing to kind of make that what we do, that starts to rewire the brain.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge for us to embrace this, but it's clear, we've been operating in our own zones and our own models, and now you put the biology behind it, and the chemicals move up and down. And it's like, well, you can almost sense that sometimes when you go through it. Yes. It doesn't make it easy, but it's certainly going to take practice, right?
Yeah, and you want to be gentle with yourself. You want to be genuine with yourself because it's going to take a practice. If you were teaching someone this, we're going to make some mistakes. We're going to screw up sometimes. So it's not about being perfect, just about being purposeful. Anything we do over and over and over becomes who we are. So it's just a matter of making it so important we're willing to do it over and over.
At what point can I begin to teach this to my kids? My kids are adults, so I was probably the horses out of the barn on that one. But when you think about this, it's like, I want my kids, I don't want them to spend time in that agony zone.
Yeah. Well, first thing you want to do is get somewhat comfortable with it yourself, because we never want to try to teach someone something that we really haven't been practicing. So, take a week or two just to kind of get comfortable with it, watch the videos, get the book, whatever it is you need to do. Then what you want to do is to notice when your kid gets really frustrated and angry. And what you want to do is kind of recognize that's them in the lower brain. But also keep in mind, who are they when they're in that upper 80% of the brain? Because that's the part of them they like and they like experiencing. So one of the things I used to do with my kids is I would go to them right after they're just doing something really fun. And I'd say, hey, boy, it looks like you're having a great time. They'll go, yeah, man, this was so cool. I say, yeah, and the other day, when you were kind of upset, that probably wasn't much fun, was it? They go, no. So I said, if I could show you a way of having more fun in the future and less feel bad time in the future, would you want to know what it is? And of course, kids' highest purpose is to have fun. So they love that idea, and you teach them the brain model, and and they love it. It's great.
Well, I'm sure for those in our audience and our community that have small children and are quarantined at home, this is probably timely information for them. As after 7 weeks, it might be a little dicey around the house. A couple more questions before we wrap up, and this kind of gets to another piece of this. For someone who seems to operate primarily in the lower part of their brain, are there options like pharmaceuticals? Is there more of of a medicinal chemical route? I mean, some folks just are in that space, and this kind of gets away from our community, but in general.
Yeah, there are. The challenge is that particular science is in its infancy. So it's not like you break a leg and you go to the doctor and they know exactly what you do. You go to the doctor and you tell them, I'm anxious, I'm depressed. Okay, well, we can try this at this dose or this at this dose. And then it takes a couple of weeks for it to have effect. For some people, it works great. For other people, it doesn't do anything. And for other people, it creates suicidal ideation. Plus, it doesn't deal with the initial kind of fears and worries and beliefs that trigger that whole thing in the first place. So I am not anti-medication, but I would encourage people not to try to use it as a way of dealing with it, because it doesn't really help you rewire the brain. It just kind of puts you in a state where you may feel a little bit better, but you may not, and it's kind of ambiguous. So you want to work with someone who really knows what they're doing, but also work with someone who can help you kind of change how you're perceiving the situation, so it's not just the pill that is making you feel different.
Well, you know what that made me think of, Dr. Bill, is we have a lot of healthcare workers who are living and experiencing and engaging with people, and they're exposed to a lot of really traumatic stuff. How would you begin to connect this concept for them, for those of us who might have friends, family, or other folks connecting that model, that maybe we could help them begin to process just some of the stuff that they have to be dealing with?
Yeah. Well, first, you've noticed they show up. No matter what, they show up. So they're clear
about
their highest
thankful
purpose.
they are.
Thank them, absolutely. Thank God for them. That's their highest purpose. They have a very purposeful sense. But because they're so focused on helping others, sometimes they don't take care of themselves as much. So I think the challenge is, would you be willing to take care of yourself like you would take care of someone you love? You're so good at taking care of others. You know, there's a quote I love that says, you can't serve from an empty cup. So we've got to be willing to take care of ourselves so that we can be there for others. And that's sometimes those frontline people are so focused on taking care of others that don't really do that same for themselves. So focusing on themselves, taking care of themselves, taking a break, asking for help, whatever it is they need is going to be a really important thing.
Well, you know, as you say that, you kind of bring us full circle back to our CEOs who are dealing with stress, and many of them take on the burdens of all their folks, and you know, and some of the very, very difficult decisions CEOs have had to make regarding people and their business, their customers. Your point about you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. I guess that's why when they give you the demonstration on the plane when we used to fly, the mask come down, fix your mask first before you come help someone else.
There you go.
So, Dr. Bill Crawford, I can see why you're clearly Speaker of the Year for last year. Thank you so much for your insights and your sharing and really stretching our brains and forcing us to get up to top of mind and think about these things. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
My pleasure. I'm going to try to go to that last slide here. Oops, here we go. And here we are there.
All right, good deal. We'll be sharing a link to this recording 24 hours from now and invite you obviously to view it and share it. If you're a Vistage member, we have 2 more webinars coming up in our Leading in Challenging Times series. Next Friday, we have Harvard professor Amy Edmondson on leveraging teams to reinvent and rebuild. We spoke with her yesterday for a little while. She's engaged in a lot of these conversations. She's very, her concepts around teaming and how important teaming will be going into and out of this, the corona ditch is going to be really powerful. Then the following Friday, we've got Brian Bolio, May 15th from ITR is going to come back. I've been listening to the ITR presentations at all our virtual VESs. I think mid-May is a perfect time for them because we will either be stepping up to and through the recovery, or we might be doing a reassessment as this drags out longer, so I invite you to stay for that. These webinars are exclusive to the Vistage community. To register, go to vistage.com/LCT-webinars. Go to the website, you'll find it. We make this available. Again, thank you, Dr. Bill Crawford. Really great for an end of the week, kind of open up the brain, and thank you for being part of our community and sharing your expertise with our members. And thanks to everyone who attended today, and for those of you listening to this on the delay, I hope you enjoy this as well. So thank you very much, and everyone, please stay home and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Take care.